The sun hadn't even risen on the horizon when Sarah Thompson was already up, her feet firmly planted in the damp soil of her farm in Riverside County, California. At 45, her face marked by the valley sun carried stories that few in the region knew completely. Dressed in her faded plaid shirt, worn jeans and ever-present mud-covered boots, Sarah adjusted the weathered straw hat she had inherited from her father, Robert, before walking among the extensive soybean fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. Another day, another battle, she muttered to herself, while observing the sky beginning to brighten, painting the horizon with shades of orange and pink. 20 years had passed since her parents, who came to California in search of fertile and affordable land in the 90s, had left the small property in her hands. What started as just 120 acres of challenging land now extended to more than 12,000 acres of highly productive crops. Sarah breathed deeply, feeling the familiar aroma of soil dampened by the dawn dew. There was something in that smell that kept her alive, that fed her soul as much as the work fed her pocket. To many in the region, she was just the Thompson woman from New Horizon Farm, a stubborn woman who preferred hard work to social life. Few knew that behind that simple appearance lay one of the largest grain producers in the western United States. "Sarah, we've got problems with the main harvester." The deep voice of Michael Davis, her trusted foreman for more than a decade, interrupted her thoughts. Michael, a man almost 6.5 feet tall with skin bronzed by years of work under the California sun, was running toward her with a worried expression. "Which harvester, Mike?" "The new John Deere," Sarah asked, already walking toward the sheds where they kept the machines. "Yes, right during harvest time. Walter is trying to see what happened, but it looks serious. Might be the hydraulic system." Sarah quickened her pace. The harvest was at its peak, and every hour of downtime meant thousands of dollars in potential losses. Walter Green, her chief mechanic, was bent over the huge equipment when they arrived. The man, already in his 60s, had taken off his cap to scratch his bald head in frustration. "So, Walter, what's the diagnosis?" Sarah asked, approaching. Walter looked up, wiping his greasy hands on an already dirty cloth. "I'm sorry, Sarah. This machine won't be working again anytime soon. The hydraulic system is completely damaged, and I suspect there are problems with the engine too. Must have been that storm last week." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, calculating the possible losses. They were at the peak of the soybean harvest, with only 2 weeks to harvest everything before the intense rains that would follow. "How long to fix it?" Walter shook his head. "Weeks, maybe. We need parts that aren't easy to find around here." Sarah adjusted her hat, a gesture that everyone around her already knew as a sign that an important decision was being made. "I'm going to Riverside today. We need a new harvester. We don't have time to lose." Michael and Walter exchanged worried glances. "Sarah, these machines cost a fortune nowadays. Are you sure we can't rent one from someone for now?" Michael suggested. Sarah smiled slightly. It was exactly the kind of reaction she expected. Even her closest employees, those who had known her for years, had no idea of the true extent of her empire. "Trust me, Mike, I can afford it." 2 hours later, Sarah was driving her Ford F-150 pickup truck, an old model but extremely well-maintained inside, towards Riverside, the largest city in the region. The dirt road soon gave way to the asphalt of Highway 91, and Sarah took the opportunity to make some calls on speakerphone. "Good morning, Mr. Olson. It's Sarah Thompson. I'll need to make a significant withdrawal today." She kept her tone neutral while talking to her bank manager. On the other end of the line, Charles Olson, the bank manager for almost 15 years, responded with his usual discretion. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. Something around a few million. I'm going to buy a new harvester, maybe more than one." There was a brief silence before Charles responded. "No problem. Your account is prepared for movements of this size. Just let me know when you're arriving so I can organize everything." "Thank you, Charles. I should arrive around noon." Sarah ended the call and smiled to herself. Her relationship with the local bank was one of her best-kept trump cards. While most farmers in the region lived on financing and loans, she had managed over the years to accumulate an impressive financial reserve, the result of smart investments and an extremely frugal personal life. Upon arriving in Riverside, Sarah went straight to the bank. Charles Olson received her with his usual deference, quickly leading her to his private office. "Mrs. Thompson, everything is prepared as requested. I must say your investments continue to perform exceptionally well." Sarah nodded, grateful. While Charles displayed some reports on his computer, she observed the city's movement through the window. Riverside had grown a lot since she arrived in California with her parents as a teenager. From a small inland city, it had transformed into the economic center of the region, driven mainly by agribusiness. "Mr. Olson, since I'm here, I'd like to know more about that property we discussed last time. Is Golden Valley Farm still for sale?" Charles smiled discreetly. "Yes, it is, and the price has dropped significantly after Frederick Watson declared bankruptcy. I believe it's an excellent investment opportunity." The name Frederick Watson caused a slight contraction on Sarah's face, something that didn't go unnoticed by the manager, although he was too discreet to comment. Frederick was an old acquaintance of the Thompson family, who had arrived in California around the same time as Sarah's parents, but whose arrogant behavior and reckless decisions had led him to financial ruin. "Interesting," Sarah responded, simply avoiding showing the whirlwind of memories that name evoked. "We can talk about that another time. Today I need to focus on buying the machines." After finalizing the banking procedures, Sarah headed to Agritech, the largest agricultural machinery dealer in the region. The imposing building, with its glass and metal facade, contrasted with the older constructions in the city center. In the parking lot, harvesters, tractors, and state-of-the-art planters were displayed like expensive jewels in a showcase. Sarah parked her old pickup truck among the luxury cars of the salespeople and executives who frequented the place. She adjusted her worn hat, took a deep breath, and walked towards the main entrance, unaware of the curious glances that followed her. As soon as the automatic doors opened, Sarah Thompson entered a world that seemed designed to make her feel out of place. The icy air conditioning, the gleaming marble floor, and the soft background music created a sophisticated atmosphere that directly contrasted with her mud-caked boots and work-worn clothes. But Sarah didn't care. To her, this was just another place of business, and she had important business to attend to. The interior of Agritech gleamed with the same ostentatious luxury that characterized many of Riverside's new enterprises. Sarah observed the salesmen, in their impeccable suits, circling potential customers like sharks in search of their next prey. One in particular caught her attention, a tall man with a meticulously groomed appearance, perfectly trimmed grey hair, and a watch that probably cost more than many paid for a car. Sarah recognized him immediately. Richard Anderson, Agritech's star salesman, known as much for his record sales as for his barely disguised contempt for less wealthy farmers. She watched him for a few moments, seeing how he smiled exaggeratedly at a well-dressed client, while completely ignoring a small producer who was trying to get information about financing. Determined, Sarah walked towards the main showroom, where the most modern harvesters were on display. Before she could examine the models more closely, she felt a presence beside her. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" Richard Anderson's voice had that condescending tone that Sarah knew well, the same tone many used when judging her by her appearance. "I'm looking for a new harvester. Mine broke down in the middle of the harvest," Sarah responded directly, without taking her eyes off the machines. Richard examined her from head to toe, barely disguising his disdain. His gaze lingered on Sarah's muddy boots and her hands calloused. "From field work. I see," he replied with a forced smile. "We have some used models that might fit your budget. This way, please." Sarah didn't move. "Actually, I'm interested in the new models, preferably the most advanced ones you have." Richard let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Ma'am?" "Thompson." "Sarah Thompson. Mrs. Thompson," he continued with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "These machines you're looking at are our premium models, the Harvest King 9000 line specifically. They're cutting-edge equipment with advanced technology, integrated GPS, advanced automation systems." He paused dramatically. "And they cost more than $2 million each." Sarah nodded, impassive. "They seem exactly what I'm looking for. This one," She pointed to the largest harvester on display. How long would it take to be delivered? Richard seemed genuinely confused by her persistence. Mrs. Thompson, perhaps I wasn't clear. These machines are not, well, they're a significant investment. We have more accessible options that— Mr. Anderson, Sarah interrupted him, her voice calm but firm. I understood the value perfectly. What I asked was how long it would take to deliver this machine to my farm, should I decide to buy it today. The salesman adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. Theoretically, we could deliver within 72 hours. But, great. And do you have more of these models in stock? Richard looked around as if seeking help from a colleague. Yes, we have 3 units available for immediate delivery, but— Perfect. I'll take all 3, Sarah declared, with the same naturalness of someone deciding to buy 3 apples at the market. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Richard Anderson looked at Sarah as if she had just spoken in an alien language. Some other nearby salespeople stopped what they were doing to observe the unusual scene. Ma'am, with all due respect, Richard finally responded, making a visible effort to maintain his composure. We're talking about an investment of more than $6 million. It's not something you decide just like that suddenly. There are procedures, financing to be approved, documentation. Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the store. I understand your concern, Mr. Anderson, but I don't need financing. I'll make the payment in cash today. Richard's smile transformed into an expression of disbelief, followed by a restrained laugh. Mrs. Thompson, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I think we're wasting time here. Why don't we— Richard, what's going on here? The deep voice interrupted the conversation. Both turned to see a middle-aged man wearing a perfectly fitted navy blue suit, approaching with determined steps. Oliver Parker, Agritech's general manager, was known for his ability to smell a big sale from miles away. Mr. Parker, Richard greeted, seeming relieved. I was just explaining to Mrs. Thompson here the most suitable options for small producers. She showed interest in our premium models, but I'm interested in buying 3 Harvest King 9000 harvesters, Sarah interrupted, addressing the manager directly. In cash. Mr. Anderson seems to have difficulty understanding this. Oliver Parker studied Sarah for a moment, his professional gaze assessing not her worn clothes, but something more subtle, the confidence and determination in her eyes. Sarah Thompson, from New Horizon Farm, he asked, completely changing his tone. Sarah nodded, surprised to be recognized. Exactly. A genuine smile spread across Parker's face. Mrs. Thompson, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Charles Olson from Agricultural Bank has told me a lot about you and your operation. He cast a severe look at Richard. Mr. Anderson, please bring the full specifications of the 3 Harvest Kings we have in stock and call the logistics team. We'll need to organize the transport as soon as possible. Richard stood paralyzed, his face alternating between confusion and embarrassment. But sir, Now, Mr. Anderson. As Richard walked away, visibly shaken, Parker turned his attention back to Sarah. I apologize for any misunderstanding. Mrs. Thompson, it's an honor to have a client of your caliber in our store. Sarah maintained her neutral expression, although internally she felt a satisfaction she wouldn't allow to show. Thank you, Mr. Parker, but I confess I'm curious. How exactly do you know me? Parker smiled, leading her to a more private area of the showroom. In our business, Mrs. Thompson, we learn to recognize who really moves agribusiness in this region. Your farm is one of the most productive in Southern California, although you maintain a discreet profile. I respect that. He paused. Besides, I have a friend at the Chicago Board of Trade who occasionally mentions the impact your crops have on the market. Sarah nodded slowly. Few knew that she not only produced grains, but also operated directly in the futures market, securing advantageous prices for her production. It was a strategy she had learned from her father and perfected over the years, multiplying her assets discreetly but consistently. The following hours passed at an accelerated pace. While Richard Anderson remained distant, visibly humiliated, Oliver Parker personally guided Sarah through the process of purchasing the 3 harvesters, offering her special conditions and bonuses that were not normally available to other customers. Have the machines delivered to your farm within 48 hours. Mrs. Thompson. And we'll send our best technicians for installation and training of your team, Parker assured, as they finalized the contract. Sarah signed the documents and, with a call to Charles Olson, authorized the bank transfer that would make New Horizon Farm the owner of the 3 most modern harvesters available on the market. As she was about to leave the store, Sarah saw Richard Anderson talking in a corner with 2 other salesmen, all looking in her direction with incredulous expressions. Determined, she walked up to them. "Mr. Anderson," she called, her voice calm as always. Richard straightened his posture, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Thompson, I'd like to apologize for the earlier misunderstanding." Sarah observed him for a moment, noticing the sweat that was beginning to form on his forehead. "There's no need for apologies, Mr. Anderson. I'd just like to leave you with some advice. Never judge a book by its cover." She adjusted her worn hat. "Especially in the field, sometimes the most calloused hands are the ones that sign the biggest checks." With those words, Sarah Thompson left Agritech, feeling the weight of the gazes that followed her. As she got into her pickup truck, she finally allowed herself a smile of satisfaction. The new harvesters would ensure her crop was harvested on time, and the lesson she had just taught would certainly be remembered for a long time in that store. As she drove back to Riverside County, Sarah reflected on how her life had changed since she took over her parents' small property. The path hadn't been easy. There were years of severe drought, pests that almost destroyed entire crops, and moments when she believed she would lose everything. But she had persevered, learning from each challenge, adapting and growing. However, not all memories were positive. There was one in particular that still haunted her, related to Frederick Watson, the farmer Charles Olson had mentioned earlier. Frederick and his son, Kevin, had been neighbors of the Thompsons for many years. While Sarah and her parents worked hard, reinvesting every cent in the property, Frederick flaunted his wealth in luxury cars, extravagant parties, and international trips. But what really marked Sarah was the complicated relationship she had with Kevin Watson. The two had grown close during adolescence, sharing the unique experience of being young Americans growing up in rural California. The romance that blossomed between them seemed predestined until irreconcilable differences separated them. Kevin shared his father's ostentatious vision, dreaming of a life of luxury and status, while Sarah valued simplicity and honest work. The breakup had been painful but necessary. Kevin had ended up returning to the East Coast to study, and Sarah had thrown herself headlong into work on the farm. Now, years later, Sarah heard that Frederick Watson was bankrupt, his farm for sale. And according to rumors circulating in the region, Kevin had recently returned to California after a tumultuous divorce on the East Coast. 3 days had passed since Sarah's visit to Agritech, and the buzz about the farmer who had bought 3 state-of-the-art harvesters in cash was already circulating throughout the region. At New Horizon Farm, the atmosphere was one of anticipation. The machines would arrive that day, bringing new energy to the team that was racing against time to complete the harvest. Sarah woke up before dawn as usual. After a quick coffee, she went out for her morning walk around the property, a ritual she had maintained for years. The sky was beginning to brighten on the horizon, painting the extensive soybean plantations with a golden light that always reminded her of her father. "You'd be proud, Dad," she murmured to herself, adjusting the worn hat she had inherited from him. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching. Turning, Sarah spotted a modern and shiny pickup truck entering the farm gates. She frowned, not recognizing the vehicle. Few visitors arrived so early, especially without prior notice. The pickup stopped a few meters from where she was standing, and for a moment, Sarah remained still, observing. When the driver's door finally opened, she felt as if time had stopped. Kevin Watson stepped out of the vehicle, so different and yet so familiar. The years had been kind to him. He still maintained the athletic build of his youth, though his blonde hair now showed strands of grey at the temples. He wore an expensive shirt and jeans that looked like they had never seen a day of work in the field. "Sarah," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered, but with the same East Coast accent he had never completely lost, even after so many Years in California. Kevin, she responded, maintaining her composure, though her heart was racing. What are you doing here? He took a few steps in her direction, stopping at a respectful distance. I heard you bought half of Agritech the other day, he commented with a small smile. I thought maybe we could talk. Sarah crossed her arms, studying him. I didn't know you were back in California. I came back 3 months ago, Kevin explained, his gaze sweeping over the vastness of the farm around them. A lot has changed. Around here, your farm has grown considerably. And your father's is for sale, Sarah commented, carefully observing his reaction. Charles Olson told me? Kevin nodded, a shadow crossing his face. My father was never good at managing money. He spent more than he had, invested poorly. He paused. In the end, the farm accumulated so many debts that there was no other option. Sarah felt a pang of compassion despite everything. Frederick Watson had always been arrogant, flaunting wealth that apparently was more in appearance than in reality. Still, it was sad to see such a promising property led to bankruptcy. And you came back to help him? Kevin let out a humorless laugh. Actually, I came back because I had nowhere else to go. My marriage ended, my job in New York too. I thought, maybe I could start over here, help my father save what was left of the farm. He looked directly at her. But it seems I arrived too late. The distant sound of heavy engines interrupted the conversation. Both turned to see a caravan of vehicles approaching on the main road, the trucks bringing the new harvesters. Your machines have arrived, Kevin commented, watching the huge vehicles approaching, kicking up dust on the road. I heard you bought the 3 Harvest Kings that were available. Impressive. Sarah shrugged. It was what I needed. My main harvester broke down at the peak of the harvest. Kevin observed her for a moment, an enigmatic smile on his lips. You know what's ironic, Sarah? All these years, you remained true to what you believed in. Simple life, hard work, constant reinvestment. I used to mock that, thought you were missing out on the best of life. He paused significantly. And now you could probably buy 10 farms like the one my father is being forced to sell. Sarah didn't respond immediately. The trucks were already entering the main area of the farm, being greeted by Michael and other employees who were waving enthusiastically. Life takes many turns, Kevin, she finally said. Maybe it's time for you to discover what you really value. With those words, Sarah began to walk towards the trucks, leaving Kevin behind with his thoughts. There was a full day of work ahead, and she had no time for musings about the past. The following hours were dedicated to unloading and installing the new harvesters. The Agritech team, led by Oliver Parker himself, worked efficiently to ensure everything was ready for immediate operation. To Sarah's surprise, Kevin remained on the farm observing the process from afar without interfering. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of red and orange, the 3 imposing machines were already positioned, ready to start work the following morning. The Agritech team had departed, leaving only the technicians who would stay for the first day of operation. Sarah was in her makeshift office in the main shed, reviewing the final details with Michael, when Kevin lightly knocked on the half-open door. May I come in? He asked hesitantly. Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. The foreman, who knew the entire history between the two, cleared his throat discreetly. I'll check if everything's ready for tomorrow, Sarah. Excuse me. When Michael left, Kevin entered the small office, observing the walls covered with maps of the property, productivity charts, and some old photos, including one of Sarah's parents alongside his own in their early years in California. You never forgot where you came from, he commented, pointing to the photo. Sarah leaned back in her simple chair. I see no reason to forget. They taught me everything I know. Kevin nodded, thoughtful. Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. He took a deep breath as if gathering courage. I didn't come back to California just because my marriage ended. I came back because my father is sick, very sick. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. I'm sorry, Kevin, I didn't know. Few people do. He doesn't want people to pity him. Kevin ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture that Sarah remembered well. The doctors gave him less than a year. He wanted to spend his last months on the farm in the place he loved, despite all the mistakes he made. But now, with the imminent sale... Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the information. Frederick Watson might have been arrogant and often unpleasant, but no one deserved to end their days away from the place they considered home. "I could," Sarah admitted with a small smile. "But I've found there are more important things than proving I can, like building something that lasts beyond me, something that makes a difference for the people who will come after us." They remained silent for a few moments, contemplating the starry sky over the vast California valleys that both had learned to call home. "You know what my father told me before we left today?" Kevin broke the silence. "He said he finally understands why my grandfather chose to come to California. It wasn't for the cheap land or the opportunities for quick profit, as he always thought. It was for the chance to build something from scratch, something truly his own, in a place where what matters is what you do, not where you came from or how you dress." Sarah nodded, understanding. Perfectly. It was exactly what her own parents had sought and what she continued to honor in every decision she made. "The land doesn't care about appearances," she said, repeating a saying her father used to use. "It responds only to honest work and constant dedication. Just like people," Kevin completed, "when we give them the chance to show who they really are." Sarah smiled, thinking of all the paths that had brought her to this moment, the difficulties, the achievements, the losses, and the new beginnings. Each choice, each challenge had forged the woman she had become, someone who knew that true wealth wasn't in what she owned, but in the difference she made in the lives of others. "To our partnership," Kevin said, raising his cup in a toast. "And to second chances," Sarah added, touching her cup to his. Together they observed the horizon where their farms met, now united not just on paper, but in purpose and vision. That year's harvest promised to be the most abundant of all, not just in grains but in possibilities. As the sun set on New Horizon Farm, Sarah and Kevin continued to talk, planning for the future while honoring the past. The challenges ahead were many, but together they felt ready to face them. The legacy of their families would live on, not just in the fertile fields of California, but in the renewed bonds between two people who had found their way back to each other. The next morning, as the new harvesters roared to life, Sarah stood, watching, her father's hat firmly on her head. Kevin stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. The farm workers cheered as the massive machines began their work, a symphony of progress and tradition. Sarah knew that this was more than just a harvest. It was a new beginning, a chance to blend the best of both their worlds, her steadfast dedication and Kevin's innovative ideas. Together, they would not only save Golden Valley Farm, but also create something greater than either of them could have achieved alone. As the golden stalks of wheat fell before the harvesters, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The past, with all its pain and misunderstandings, was behind them. Ahead lay a future bright with promise, as vast and rich as the California fields stretching out before them.